Chapter 42. The Beretta Mars-Tech had a burst function that allowed 3 shots for every trigger pull. Sevgi Ertekin came through the door with it enabled, gun raised and cupped in both hands, and she squeezed the trigger twice for each figure in her sights. No time for niceties. She'd seen through the window what was about to go down. The expansion slugs made a flat, undramatic crackling sound as they launched, but they tore down her targets like cardboard. Bodies jerked and hurled aside. 2 down. The third one was turning, tiger swift. The first burst missed him altogether, a big, heavy silver revolver tracking around in his hand. She squeezed again, and he flipped over backward like a circus trick. Marsalis flopped about on the ground, struggled to sit up. She couldn't see if he was hit. She advanced into the room, gun swinging to cover angles in approved fashion, peering down at the men she'd just hit. No. Wait. She took in staring eyes and crumpled, awkward postures. One of them slumped almost comically in the arms of a chair. Legs slid out from under him, one on the floor in a sprawl of limbs like some tantrum-prone child's doll. The men she'd just killed. The Mars-Tech gun and its load unequivocal in its sentencing as a Jesus-land judge. The third one hit her from the side. Flash glimpse of a bloodied face, distorted with rage. She hit the floor, arms splayed back to break the fall, lost the fucking Beretta with the impact. For a moment the third man lurched above her, growling through lips skinned back off his teeth, empty hands crooked like talons. The look in the eyes was savage, stripped of anything human. She felt the terror thrust up like wings in her stomach and chest cavity. He saw the fallen gun, stepped past her to get it. Unbekannt. Her attacker twisted around, bent halfway over to the Beretta, saw the same as her, Karl Marsalis propped up off the floor with a big revolver in his hand. He wheeled about and the shot went wide. Deep bellow of the heavy caliber across the room. Marsalis snarled something, swung and fired again. The door swung shut on the other man. Sevgi grabbed up her gun. "You okay?" Grim nod. He was getting unsteadily to his feet. She gave him a tight grin and went to the door, pushed it open a crack and peered out. The teardrop she'd taxi-trailed from the hotel was still there, on the other side of the deserted, dilapidated street. The injured third man fumbled at its door, got it open. No time. She ran through and took up her firing stance again on the sidewalk. 1,000 memories from the streets and back alleys of Queens and Manhattan. 11 years of pursuits and arrests. It pulsed through her, anchored her, steadied her hands. "Police officer! Put your hands on your head! Get down on the ground!" He seemed to kneel at the opened door of the car. She trod closer. "I said, get your hands—" He spun, yanked a weapon clear from somewhere, came up firing. She shot back. Clutch of 3, saw him punched back on the teardrop's high-sheen flank, but knew at the same time she'd gone too high. Felt something kick her in the left shoulder, staggered with it and fell back against the wall of the bar. One leg shot out from under her. She flailed not to go all the way down. She braced herself on the wall, saw him reel off the car, leave smears of blood, matte on the shiny bodywork of the teardrop, stagger and collapse inside the vehicle. She fought to get upright again, watched him lean out to haul the door closed after him, knew she was going to be too late. She threw up the Beretta one-handed and snapped off a shot. The 3-slug burst was too powerful to hold down. The bullets pinged off the teardrop nowhere near. The door hinged and snapped shut with a clunk she heard right across the street. The engine whined into instant life. She stumbled forward, tried to straighten up, tried against the numbness in her shoulder to get a clean bead on the teardrop as it took off. 3 times she came down on the trigger. 9 shots, solid, pulsing kick each time into the wounded shoulder from the 2-handed firing stance she held. The teardrop slewed side to side, then straightened up, reached a corner and took it at speed, disappeared from view on a screech of abused tires. She let her arms drop, blew out a disgusted breath, and just stood there for a moment. "Fuck it," she said finally. Her voice sounded loud in the suddenly silent street. 2 out of 3. Anyone got a problem with that? Apparently no one did. She walked back to the bar, pushed open the door and leaned there in the doorway, surveying the mess. Marcellus had gotten himself upright in the midst of it, had the revolver in his hand. He jolted as she came in, then just stood there, looking at her. A faint smile twitched at her lips. "I take it there's no one back there in the restroom." "You take it right." "Good. I'm tired." She put the Beretta away in its shoulder holster, wincing a little at the pain the movement caused her. "You okay?" She looked down at her left shoulder where the slug had torn through. Blood leaked slowly down the arm of her ruined jacket. The numbness was fading out now to a solid, thumping ache. She flexed her left hand, lifted it, and grimaced a little at the pain. "Yeah, he tagged me. Flesh wound. I'll live." "You want me to take a look at it?" "No, I don't fucking want you to take a look at it." She hesitated, gestured what might have been apology. Her voice softened. "Rimsec are on their way. It'll wait." "I heard the car. Did he get away?" She grimaced. "Yeah. Hit him a couple of times, but not enough to put him down. 13s, huh? Yeah, we're tough motherfuckers, you know." And then the breath seemed to come out of Marcellus as if he'd been punctured. He went to the bar, got behind it, and laid the revolver carefully down on the scarred wood. "Thank Christ that's over," he said feelingly. "You want a drink?" "No, I don't want a fucking drink. He got away." Marcellus turned to survey the piled assortment of bottles behind him. His eyes found her in the mirror. "Yeah, but look on the bright side. We're neither of us dead, which is a big fucking improvement on what I was expecting 10 minutes ago." She shivered a little, shook it off. Marcellus picked out a bottle from the multitude and a couple of shot glasses from below the bar. He set the glasses up on the bar top and drizzled amber-coloured liquor into them. "Look, humour me. Least I owe you for saving my life back there is a couple of stolen whiskies, and you look like you could use them." "Oh, hey, thanks a lot. I save your fucking life, you tell me I look like shit?" He made a wobbling plane of his hand, tilted it back and forth. "Bit pale, let's say." "Fuck you." She picked up the glass. He matched her, clinked the glasses together very gently, said very quietly, "I owe you, Sevgi." She sipped and swallowed. "Call it quits for the skaters. You don't owe me a thing." "Oh, but I do. Those guys in New York were trying to kill me as well as you. That was self-defense. This is different. Cheers." They both drained their glasses. Sevgi leaned on the bar opposite him and felt the warmth work its way down into her belly. He lifted the bottle, querying. She shook her head. "Like I said, Rimsec should be here any minute," she said. "I called them back around the time your friends made their entrance. Would have stormed in a little earlier, but I was hoping for some backup." "Well." He looked at his hands, and she saw they were trembling a little. It did something to the pit of her stomach to see that. He looked up again, grinned. "Pretty good timing, anyway. How the hell did you wind up here?" "I saw you walk out of the hotel. I was just arriving." She nodded at the corpses on the floor between them. "Saw the teardrop with these guys pull out and go after your taxi. Took me a few seconds to flag one down myself. Then when I got down here, I saw them sit outside the bar and wait. I didn't know what the fuck was going on. What you'd be doing all the way out of town like this, if these guys were with you or not. Only called it in when I heard shots and they headed on over. Which reminds me, what the fuck were you doing down here?" He looked away from her into a corner. "Just looking for a fight." "Yeah? Looks like you found a good one." He said nothing. "So who were they?" "I don't know." "You called him something." A sudden cop sharpness spiked in her mind, ruined the moment with its objections. "Back when he went for the gun, I heard you. On something." "Onbekend, yeah, it's his name. He introduced himself while he was getting ready to kill me." Marcellus frowned to himself. "He was a 13. He told you that?" "It came up in the conversation, yeah." She shivered again. "Bit of a coincidence." "Isn't it? Speaking of which, what were you doing back at the hotel watching me?" "Oh, yeah, that." She nodded, let the satisfaction of being right warm her into a faint smile of her own. "Came to tell you. NYPD tracked down the third skater and brought him in. He says their target was Ortiz all along, not you." Marsalis blinked. "Ortiz?" "Yeah. Seems you and me just got caught in the crossfire. Sort of puts Norton in the clear, doesn't it? Paranoia aside, I mean." "Are you sure about this? I mean, did NYPD check if—" "Marsalis, just fucking drop it." Her weariness seemed to be building, or maybe the whiskey had been a bad idea. Either way, her eyes were starting to ache. "Better yet, just think about apologizing if you know how that's done. You were fucking wrong. End of fucking story." "Don't gloat, Ertekin. It's not attractive, remember?" And she had to laugh then, even through the crushing weight of the tiredness. In the distance, she heard a Rimsec siren approaching. "And I'm not looking to get laid," she said. "Yeah, you are." She chuckled. "No, I'm fucking not." "You are." "I'm fucking not, you—" She coughed hard, caught off guard by the abrupt violence of it, shook her head and found her eyes flooded with sudden tears. She heard Marsalis produce a chuckle of his own. "Well, maybe not then. I wouldn't want to—" Another shiver ripped through her, stronger. In the wake of the coughing, her head was suddenly aching. She frowned and put a hand to the side of her brow. "Sevgi?" She looked up, gave him a puzzled smile. The shivering was still there. She hadn't shaken it at all. The siren was louder now, but it seemed to get stuck inside her head, and the noise it made there scraped. "I don't feel too good." Her face went mask-like with shock. "What did he shoot you with, Sevgi?" "I don't—" "Did you see the gun he shot you with?" He was around the bar at her side as she shook her head sleepily. "No. He got away, like I said." He turned her, put his hands on either side of her face. His voice was tight and urgent. "Listen to me, Sevgi. You have to stay awake. You're going to start feeling very tired in the next—" "Going to?" she giggled. "Fuck, Marsalis. I could sleep for a month right here on this fucking floor." "No, you stay awake." He shook her head. "Listen, they're coming. They'll be here. We'll get you to the hospital. Just don't fucking flake on me." "What are you talking about? I'm not going to—" She stopped because she saw, noticed groggily, that his eyes were tear-sheened like her own. She frowned, and the skin on her face felt hot and thick and stiff. She had to force expression into it, like pushing a hand into a tight new glove. She made a small, amused sound. "Hey, Marsalis," she slurred, trying not to. "What's the matter? You feeling bad as well?" The Rimsec medical team took her out in a stretcher, got her in the helicopter. She wasn't quite sure how that had happened. One minute Marsalis was cradling her in the corpse-strewn shithole bar. The next they were out in the chilly air, and she was looking straight up at the shrouded stars. Awareness was a flapping cloth behind her eyes, there, then gone. Gone, then back again. She tried to crane her neck and see what was going on around her, but it was all a blur of shouts and lights and hurrying, busy figures. The clatter of the helicopter rotors just added to what was now a splitting headache. "Sevgi?" "Oh, Marsalis. There he was." "It's okay, sir. We'll take it from here." "You tell them it's a hog slug." She couldn't work out why he was shouting, unless it was the racket of the rotor blades. Nothing seemed to connect up the way it should. She thought maybe she'd lost a lot of blood after all. "You tell them they've got to get the smartest antivirals they have into her, right now." "We know that, sir. We've called ahead." She squinted in the glare from the helicopter's landing lights. It hurt to do. She just about made out Marsalis's bulk. He had one of the paramedics by the shoulders, was shaking him. "Don't you fucking let her die!" he was yelling. "I will kill you and everyone you care for if you let her die." Scuffling, the helicopter shifted about, lifted and wheeled away, studded lights all over the hills of the city, the rise and fall of it, the tilting horizon, as if she weren't fucking dizzy enough already. and she seemed to have been hanging on forever. Not just this shit, whatever it was, the whole Hawkins Pride case, the whole fucking thing with Marsalis, the wrecked attempt to make something of it. The repeated calls to her father, the stilted, carefully polite conversations and the barrier she could no longer break through. The memories of Ethan, the battle for custody and reimplantation of Murat-to-be, the serried ranks of lawyers in their fucking waiting rooms. The struggle to hold on to faith, to go back to the mosque and find whatever it was that welled up out of Rabia's poetry and Nazli Valpour's writing and Meltem's kindly, smiling patience. The search for reasons to go on that didn't come in bottles or foil wafers. It marched through her mind in tawdry procession, and she was suddenly sick of it all, sick of the effort. Better to just watch the sway and twinkle of the city lights below, go where the ride was taking her, listen to the motors hammering out their white noise refrain like lying next to a waterfall that smelled ever so slightly of oil and hot metal. The tilting night sky, sense of the sea, flat and black beyond. Not so bad, when you thought about it, not really. Not so hard. She gave up holding on not long after that, just let go and slid away down the gradient of her own immense tiredness. Part 5. Home to Roost. The problems we address here are general to humanity. No amount of privileged withdrawal, segregation, or hierarchical exclusion will serve to insulate any of us from a process of fallout that has already begun. If we are arrogant, if we fail to acknowledge this generality and to act on it while there is still time, then the price that we pay for our failure will be horrific, and it will be levied on us all. Jacobson Report, August 2091. Chapter 43. Dawn crept up on the Stanford campus like a cautious painter, mixing colour into the monochrome gloom overhead so it faded through shades of grey toward a clean morning blue, layering beige back onto the sandstone angles of the hospital buildings one pale coat at a time, working from the top down. In the gardens, the hedges and trees got back their green, and people started to come through on the gravel paths in ones and twos. A few of them glanced at the black man seated alone on the bench, but none stopped. There was a curious immobility to him that drove off any impulse to human contact, and stilled conversational voices as they approached. Those whose work was in the acute wards at the medical centre knew at a glance what it meant. This was a man undergoing surgery without anaesthetic, the slow, saw-toothed severing of himself from another human being somewhere inside the hospital. Out on the freeway, the occasional brushing sound of nighttime traffic was building to a steady background murmur. Birdsong made self-important, twittering oral counterpoint, like handfuls of brightly coloured pebbles tossed continually onto a broad grey conveyor belt. Human voices splashed between with increasing strength and frequency, feet crunched in gravel like a grave being dug. Day stormed the walls Carl had built around himself in the cold hours, smashed and battered down the simplicity of his vigil with human detail. He looked up out of the wreckage with a quiet and implacable hatred for everything he could see and hear. "Happy now?" Norton stood in front of him, not in reach. He'd slept in his clothes somewhere. Even the Mars Tech jeans were creased. He seemed to be genuinely waiting for an answer. "No." "You?" There was a stone bench on the other side of the path, twin to the one Carl was using. Norton lowered himself onto it. "You're not going to get away with this," he said woodenly. "I'm going to have you sent back to South Florida State. I'm going to have you sent to Cimarron or Tanana for the rest of your fucking life." By the look of him, he'd been crying. Carl felt a brief stab of envy. "How is she?" he asked. "You're joking, of course, you fuck." The mesh pounded up out of his desolation. He lifted a shaky, loose-fingered hand, pointed it. "Don't push me, Norton. I could do with killing something right now, and it might as well be you." "You took the words right out of my mouth." Norton stared down at his own hands as if assessing their suitability for the task. "But that isn't going to help Sevgi." "Nothing's going to help Sevgi, you fucking prick." There was a brutal pleasure somewhere in the snapped words, like biting down on a mouth ulcer until it split and bled. "Didn't they tell you? It's a hog slug." "Yes, they told me. They also tell me Stanford has the best immune system repair clinic on the West Coast. Cutting-edge techniques." "It won't matter. It's Falwell. Nothing short of death stops that motherfucker." "That's right. Give up, why don't you? Very fucking British." Carl stared at him for a couple of seconds, made a disgusted, spitting noise and looked away. A young woman went by pushing a bike. The small black backpack she wore had a smiley face pinned to it, winking a merciless yellow in the fresh morning light. "Whatever you are," a tinselly patch above the badge suggested brightly, "be a good one." "Norton," he said quietly. "How is she?" The Colin executive shook his head. "They've stabilized her. That's all I know. They've got an engine mapping the viral shift." Carl nodded, sat in silence. Finally, Norton asked him, "How long has she got?" "I don't know." Carl drew breath, let it out by shuddering increments. "Not long." More quiet. More people went past, talking intimate irrelevances, living their lives. "Marsalis? How the fuck did this guy get hold of a hog gun in the first place?" There was a high, desperate note in Norton's voice now, like a child protesting an unfair punishment. "They're illegal everywhere I know. Incredibly expensive to get hold of on the black market. Lethally dangerous in the wrong hands. There can't be more than a couple of hundred people on the planet with a hog carry permit." "Yeah. For anyone with major male tendency, you just described the perfect object of desire." Carl drew on the collateral detail like dying embers in a fire, huddling to the warmth and distraction it offered. "Hog guns infinitely attractive to anyone even remotely enamored of weaponry. Guy I knew in Texas once offered me $500,000 for mine. Cash in a suitcase." "Okay, look." The Colin exec rubbed hands over his face, dragged his head up through his fingers. "Say this guy, this Unbekend, he somehow gets hold of a hog gun because it makes his dick hard. He carries it into a situation where he runs the risk of arrest or a shootout with Rimsek, and just before the action starts, he leaves the damn thing in the car? There's no sense in that." Yes, there is. He'd had the whole night to think it through, sitting in a chair outside the intensive care unit and fitting together the irreversible march of events that put Sevgi Ertekin in a support cocoon on the other side of the bio-sealed doors. He had his solution before dawn, and it stared him in the face like a skull, drove him out of the cleanly kept corridors and away, down into the gardens and their greying light. Ombekind brought the hog gun for me, because he thought he was going to have to walk me out of the hotel and get me somewhere they could fake my suicide. They couldn't afford a murder. They're trying to run silent right now. And Ombekind couldn't afford to sedate me because it might show up in an autopsy. He was looking to back me up and push me around fully conscious, and that's a tricky thing to do with a 13. We don't scare easily, and we're generally not that afraid of dying. But there are ways and ways to die. I might have tried to jump almost any ordinary weapon, even against the odds. Not the hog gun." "He told you that? That he was planning to fake your suicide?" "Yeah, he told me." Carl stared back into the memories. "Above and beyond anything he was hired to do, Onbekend hated me. I'm used to that from other 13s. It's standard. But this was a little more. He wanted me stripped down before I died. Wanted me to know how stupid I'd been. How far ahead and above me he was. How pitiful I was going to look with my brains blown out by my own hand somewhere." "But they shelved the suicide." "Yeah." Carl drew another hard breath. Onbekend's remembered scorn cut through him. "They didn't need it. I went walkabout and the plan changed. It was going to be enough to fake a street death instead. No need for the Hague as a threat, and it would have been entirely the wrong weapon to actually kill me with. Hornbeckend left it in the teardrop, only used it on Sevgi because he didn't have anything else at hand. Norton stared at him. I'm sure that'll be a great comfort to her. Carl looked tiredly back at him. You want to blame me for this, Norton? Need a target for your impotent male rage? Go right ahead. Hate me. I'm used to it. I'm not going to notice the extra weight. Just don't push your luck because I'm tired and I will break you in half if you cross the line. If I hadn't gone out, it would have been different. I know. They would have taken me in the hotel, walked me out, and Sevgi Ertekin would still have been there when it happened because, Norton, she was coming to see me anyway. Maybe that's what's really eating you, huh? Oh, fuck you. But it was said wearily, and he looked away. You want to know the truth, Norton? Why she was coming to see me? No, I don't. She was coming to clear your name. The Colin exec looked back at him as if Carl had just slapped him. What? I didn't trust you, Norton, any more than a Jesus-land presidential address. Those skaters were outside Sevgi's place that morning and you were the only one who knew where I was. I figured you had some agenda that involved wiping me off the landscape. What? I fucking got you out of jail in the first place, Marsalis. It was my call, my initiative. Why the hell would I? Hey, call it 13 paranoia, Carl sighed. Anyway, seems last night Sevgi got a call from NYPD. They'd picked up the third skater and he talked. I was never the target. Ortiz was. Sevgi was coming to tell me that because she couldn't bear the idea of your name being smeared. Norton said nothing. Feel any better now? No. It was a whisper. She never wore it as a theory anyway. Slapped me down when I tried to sell it to her. I don't know if you guys were ever an item. We weren't, snapped out, brittle and harsh. No, well, whatever you had, it still went pretty deep, apparently. Long silence. Norton looked about the garden as if he might see some kind of explanation hanging up in a shrub, sparkling there in the fountain. She was a cop, he muttered finally. 2.5 years in Colin, but I don't think she ever really changed. Yeah, she was a cop. That's why she backed you, her partner, against anything I could sell her. And that's why she went out into the street after Hornbeckend, and that's why she got shot. More quiet. Direct sunlight reached the bottom of the buildings, gilded the gravel. There was some real warmth seeping into the day now. A group of students went past in a hurry, late for something. A woman in a blue doctor's tunic came toward them from the acute unit building. Which of you is Marsalis? She asked peremptorily. Under close-cropped black hair, her Chinese features were smudged with tiredness. Carl raised his hand. The doctor nodded. You'd better come in. She's asking for you. Norton looked away. The V format was state-of-the-art and took less time than he'd expected to cajole his 13 nervous system into relaxing and accepting the illusion. He blinked in behind floor-to-ceiling sliding glass doors. On the other side there was a garden, less arid and stylized than the one he'd been sitting in back in the real world. Here there was a border of lush growth around the well-kept lawn, nodding ferns and draped foliage, tall, straight trees beyond. A pair of wooden easy chairs were set out in the centre. Sevgi Ertekin sat in one of them, loosely robed in a slate and blue kimono with Arab characters embroidered, waiting. There was a book in her lap, but she held it closed, fingers loosely inserted between the pages. Her head was lifted, as if listening. She was staring at something else, as if someone already stood there on the other side of the garden, waiting as well. The glass slid back soundlessly, and he stepped through. The motion caught her eye, or the system was wired to chime the arrival of visitors. She saw him, lifted an arm in greeting. "Nice, isn't it?" she called out. No expense spared for dying Colin executives, you know." "So I see." He walked to her, stood looking down into her face. The system had allowed no trace of her illness into its imaging. She gestured. "Come on, then. Sit down, soak it up." He sat. "I guess I'm looking a lot better in here than I do for real," she said brightly, treading on the heels of his own thoughts with an accuracy that made him blink. "Right?" "I don't know. They haven't let me in to see you yet." "Well, they haven't shown me a mirror yet, either. Then again, I haven't asked. I figure the idea is to make you feel as good about yourself as possible. Hope that kicks your will to live into high gear, boosts your immune system, and gets you out of their expensive acute care unit as soon as humanly possible." She stopped abruptly, as if unplugged, and he saw for the first time how scared she really was. She licked her lips. "Of course, that's not a dynamic that applies to me." He said nothing, could think of nothing to say. A brook chuckled to itself somewhere beyond the foliage. A couple of small birds hopped about on the grass, closer to the humans than would have been likely in the real world. Sunlight struck through the surrounding trees at a high angle. "My father's flying in from New York," she said, and sighed. "I'm not looking forward to that." "I don't suppose he is, either." She ghosted a chuckle, barely louder than the brook. "No, I guess not. We haven't been getting along all that well the last few years. Don't see each other much, don't really talk. Not the way we used to, anyway." Another faint laugh. "He's probably going to think I did this just to get his attention. Deathbed reconciliation. What a fucking drama queen, huh?" Carl felt his mouth tighten, back teeth locking down with involuntary force. It cost him more effort than he'd thought to keep looking at her. "Norton here?" she asked. "Yeah." He tried to smile. It was as if he'd forgotten which muscles to use. "I think he's kind of hurt you asked to see me first." Ertekin pulled a face. "Yeah, well, be time for everybody. It's not like I've got a lot of friends." He took an interest in one of the brightly coloured birds around his feet. "Marsalis?" He looked up reluctantly. "Yeah." "How much time have I got?" "I don't know," he said quickly. "But you know how the hog system works." Urgency in her voice, like pleading. "You've used the fucking thing often enough. You must have some idea." "Sevgi, it depends. They're treating you with state-of-the-art antivirals here." "Yeah, just like fucking Nayland." "Sorry?" She shook her head. "Doesn't matter. Look, you're not going to scare me any more than I already am. Tell me the truth. They can't stop it, can they?" He hesitated. "Tell me the fucking truth, Carl." He met her eyes. "No, they can't stop it." "Good. Now tell me how long I've got." "I don't know, Sevgi, honestly. They can probably back it up with what they have here, maybe model it enough to—" He saw the look on her face and stopped. "Weeks," he said. "A couple of months at most." "Thank you." "Sevgi, She raised a hand, made a smile for him. She got out of the chair. "Going to walk down by the river? Want to come? They told me I'm not supposed to exert myself even in here. Stimulus feedback. Apparently it affects the nervous system almost like the real thing. But I think I'd like to walk a little while I still can." She held up the book. "And there's only so much 15th century poetry you can handle without a break, you know." He read the title off the antique russet and green binding. The Perfumed Garden, by Ibn Muhammad al-Nafzawi. "Any good?" "The aphrodisiac recipes are shaky, but the rest is pretty solid, yeah. Always promised myself I was going to get around to reading it one day." Again the brief flicker of fear in her eyes, rapidly quashed. "Better late than never, right?" Again he had no answer, not for what she said or for what he'd seen in her eyes. He followed her across the lawn toward the sound of the water and helped her hold back the hanging branches that blocked passage. They eased through, bent-backed, and stood up in sun-dappled foliage on the bank of the shallow stream. Sevgi stared down at the flow for a while as it slipped past them. "I need to ask you a couple of favors," she said quietly. "Sure." "I need you to stay on here. I know I said you were free to go. I know I more or less sent you away, but—" "Don't worry." His voice thickened. He had to damp down the surge of fury. "I'm not going to just walk away from this. Ormbekend is a dead man walking, and so is whoever sent him." "Good. But that's not what I meant." "No?" "No. With what's happened now, there's more than enough to keep the case wide open. It'd be good if you were there to help out after I'm—" She made a limp gesture at the flow of the stream. "But that's not what I'm asking you for. This is, well, it's more selfish." "I'm alive because of you, Sevgi," he said tonelessly. "That buys you a lot of indulgence." She turned. She touched his hand. There was a brief, visceral shock to it. Tactile contact was one of the wrinkles the technology still hadn't really ironed out, and format etiquette tended against it as a result. Outside of the crude and curiously unsatisfying porn virtuals he'd used on base in the military, he doubted he'd touched anyone in format more than half a dozen times in his life, and most of those would have been accidental collisions. Now he felt Sevgi Ertekin's hand as if through gloves, and a twitching sense of frustration rose to fan the embers of his fading anger. "I need you to stay with me," she said. She looked down at where their hands met as if trying to make out some detail she wasn't sure was there. "It's going to be hard. Morat, that's my father. He's going to be hurting too much. Norton's too conflicted. Everyone else is too far off. I've pushed them all away anyway since Ethan. I wouldn't know what to say to them. That leaves you, Carl. You're clean. I need you to help me do this." "Clean?" "You said 2 favors, he reminded her. "Yeah." She dropped his hand, went back to staring at the flow of the water. "I think you know what the other one's going to be." He stood beside her and watched the stream flow. "All right," he said. Chapter 44. He waited for Norton in the corridor outside the visiting station and the V-format cubicles. The Colin exec came out puffy-eyed and blinking, as if the light in the corridor was too harsh to deal with. "I need to talk to you," Carl told him. Norton's face twitched. "And you think now's the time?" "She isn't going to improve, Norton. You'd better get used to operating under these conditions." "What do you want?" "Have you read the statement I gave to Rimsek?" "No, Norton closed his eyes for a moment. "Yes, I skimmed it. So what?" "Someone sent Ormbekend to take me out. Probably the same someone who hired Carmen Wren to partner Merrin. The same someone who had Merrin brought back to Earth in the first place. We're not done here. We're not even half done." Norton sighed. "Yes, I've just spent the last 20 minutes with Sevgi telling me the same thing. I don't need you to ram it home. Colin will step up the inquiry. Rimsek are already covering bases here. Right now, though, I'm not going home until this is done." "Yes. Sevgi made that quite clear to me as well." Norton tried to brush past him. Carl fought down a desire to snag his arm and snap him around. He backed up a couple of rapid paces instead and put his arm out across the corridor to the wall, so the Colin exec had to stop. Norton's teeth clenched, his fists balled at his sides. "What do you want from me, Marsalis?" "2 things. First, you need to get on to Ortiz and have him put a stopper on my release back to Angler jurisdiction. I had a call from the Brussels office last night and they're very keen to have me back in the fold." "Ortiz is barely out of intensive care. He's in no condition." "Then talk to whoever is. But I want to have to fight Angler as well as whoever's running Ormbekend." Norton pulled in a compressed breath. "Very well. I'll pass this on to Nicholson when I speak to him this afternoon. What else?" "I want you to lean on Colony. I want to talk to Gutierrez." Colin ran a small administrative unit out of 2 blocks in downtown Oakland with facilities for a Mars comms link. Norton got a RimSec autocopter detail to fly them back up and across the bay, and a Colin limo to meet them at touchdown. He did it all with the remote command of a preoccupied man driving a familiar route home. In the limo, he called ahead to the comms link duty technician and set up the call. Sevgi burned in his head like a brand, dry-eyed beside the small stream. All the things she didn't say. All the things he didn't either. The red tape from the colony police administration at the Mars end was fierce and self-referential. Having Gutierrez arrested and interrogated had been easy by comparison. Colony knew, in their own cloddish way, how to do that. But authorized off-world communication, from custody, with non-Colin personnel, was apparently just too exotic to have precedent or established procedure. It took 3 levels of rank before he reached someone who'd do what he told them. And the distances didn't help. Mars currently sat just less than 250 million kilometers away, and transmission time was around 13.5 minutes each way. Almost a full half-hour between each act of communication. It seemed, somehow, emblematic. Marsalis prowled outside the chamber, occasionally visible through the head-height windows on the door. There was a small, mean-spirited pleasure in excluding the 13 from the early proceedings, an impulse that Norton knew only too drearily well was the human equivalent of a tomcat pissing to mark his territory. He was too tired to combat the urge, too non-specifically furious to feel embarrassed by his behavior. He battered down the red tape at Colony with a cold, controlled anger he hadn't known he owned, appealed to reason where he could, bullied and threatened where he could not. He waited out the long delay silences that punctuated the whole process with the patience of an automaton. None of it seemed to matter, except as a way to stave off the knowledge that Sevgi would die, was dying right now, by stages, as her immune system staggered under the repeated blows from the Folwell viruses and their mutating swirl. Finally, he let Marsalis in, ceded the operational seat and folded himself into an off-scope chair at the side of the chamber. Stared emptily at the 13 as he settled himself. "You really think this is going to work?" His voice was slack and careless in his own ears, run flat with emotional overload. "That depends," said Marsalis, studying the countdown clock above the lens and screen array in front of him. "On what?" "On whether Franklin Gutierrez wants to go on living or not." The last digits blinked through, the receiving announcer chimed, and the screen rezzed up to an image of a similar transmission chamber at the Mars end. Gutierrez sat there, cleaned up since Norton had last seen him dragged out of interrogation. There was a clean white plaster wrap on his damaged hand, and the bruising around his face and eye had been treated with inflammation suppressants. He frowned into the camera a little, glanced aside to someone off-screen, then cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Till I see who the fuck's on the other end of this, I don't say anything. Got that? You get these morons to pull their claws out of me, we can maybe do some kind of deal. But that's when I see your face, not before." He sat back. The transmission locked seal blipped across the screen in green machine code, and the image froze. The online light glowed orange. Marsalis sat looking at the screen, moved no more than a corpse. "Hello, Franklin," he said flatly. "Remember me? I'm pretty sure you do. So now that you know who's on the other end, listen carefully to me. You will give me everything you know about Alan Merrin and why you helped send him home. You get one chance to do this. Don't disappoint me." He snapped the arm control, and the transmission sealed, fired off. Above their heads the counter started down again. "You'll forgive me if I'm not impressed yet," Norton said. Marsalis barely shifted in the seat, but his eyes tracked round. Out of nowhere, through all the weariness and grief, Norton saw something there that sent a small chill chasing around the base of his skull like cold water rinsing around a basin. They waited out the counter. It reached 0, started counting up again into time used before transmission at the other end. "Hey, the lottery man!" Gutierrez came back, sneering. But behind it Norton could see the chill. The same jolt he'd felt when Marsalis looked at him half an hour earlier, and the counter told its own tale in glowing, frozen digits. They were up around 2.5 minutes over base transmission and turnaround time, and unless the data hawk had made a speech to the camera, the time overspill was hesitation. Gutierrez had jammed up, had to put a reply together on hold. The bravado rang false as a Tennessee Mars Tech label. "Yeah, how's your luck holding back home, Marsalis? How you doing? Missing the girls from the Dozen Up Club?" After that, Gutierrez switched into Quechua. The screen fired up stilted subtitles to cover. "You are 300 million kilometers away from me. That is a long way off for making threats. What will you do, take the long sleep? Come all the way back here just to kill me? Don't scare me any more, Marsalis. You make me laugh." It went on, derisory, building the bravado up. It boiled down to fuck off and die. It still rang false. Marsalis watched it all with a thin, cold smile. When the transmission ended, he leaned forward and started speaking, also in Quechua. Norton had no knowledge of the Altiplano tongue beyond counting 1 to 20 and a handful of food items, but even through the blanket incomprehension he felt a dry ice cold coming off the black man and what he was saying. The words husked out of him, rustling and intent, like something reptilian breaking out of an egg. In the fog of sleeplessness that was gradually shutting down his senses, Norton had one moment of clarity so supreme he knew it had to be a lie. But in that moment it was as if something else was speaking through Marsalis, something ancient and not really human, using his mouth and face as a mask, and a launch point to hurl itself across the gulf between worlds, to reach out and take Franklin Gutierrez by the throat and heart, as if he were sitting across a desk and not 250 million kilometers of empty space. It took little more than a minute to say whatever it was, but for Norton the whole thing seemed to happen outside real time. When Marsalis was finished speaking, the Colin exec opened his mouth to say something. Say anything, to break the creaking "something has left the building" silence, and then stopped because he saw that Marsalis had not thumbed for transmission. The message was still open, still waiting to be sealed, and for what seemed like a very long time the black man just looked into the facing lens and said nothing at all. Just looked. Then he touched the button, and in some way Norton could not define, he seemed to slump. It was a solid minute before the Colin exec found words of his own. "What did you say?" he asked, through dry lips. Marsalis twitched like someone waking from a doze, shot him a normal, human look, shrugged. "I told him I'd go back to Mars and find him if he didn't tell me what I wanted to know. Told him Colin would fund the ticket there and back. Told him I'd kill him and everyone he cares about. You think he'll buy it?" The black man's attention drifted back to the screen. He must also, Norton suddenly realized, be very tired. "Yes, he'll buy it. And if he doesn't? If he calls your bluff?" Marsalis glanced at him again, and Norton knew what the answer was going to be before the quiet, matter-of-fact words fell into the quiet room. "This isn't a bluff." They waited, down to 0 on the glowing counter and then minutes clocking up beyond. Neither of them said anything. Norton at least could think of nothing to say, but the lack was almost companionable. Marsalis met his eye once or twice, and once he nodded as if the Colin exec had said something, so securely that Norton wondered if he hadn't in the extremities of his grief and weariness vocalized some random internal thought. If he had, he couldn't recall what it was. The quiet in the room settled in around him like a blanket, warming and soothing, inviting escape, exit from the mess and the grief, the slide down into the soft oblivion of long-deferred sleep. He jerked awake. The chime of the receiver and his neck cricked and aching. The screen rezzed up again. Gutierrez came through, panic-stricken and babbling. Chapter 45. "You're clean." He couldn't work out what she meant. Not really. He tried. He tugged at the tight, knotted intricacies of it while he sat in a pool of lamplight in the darkened offices at Colin and played back the transcript of Gutierrez cracking wide open. He gave up exasperated, left it alone, came back and tugged at it some more. "That leaves you, Carl. You're clean." He felt around the rough contours of it, but it was like searching for holds on one of the improbably towering cliff faces in the Massif Verne. Your fingers told you what was there, gave you something to hold on to or lever off, but that was immediate applicability, not the shape of the hole. It wasn't understanding. He knew the moves that were coming. What "that leaves you, you're clean" meant in terms of what she wanted him to do, but that no more told him what she believed about him, what she thought they were to each other, than a successful series of moves back on that Verne rock gave you a topographic map of the face. It was like being back in the Osprey compound, puzzling over one of Aunt Chitra's more obscure training koans. "You're clean." The phrase ticked in his head like a bomb. Norton left, presumably to get some sleep before he collapsed. He offered no comment other than, "See you in the morning." His tone was hesitant, if not friendly, then a close analogue, buffered soft by exhaustion. Somewhere in the last few hours the tension between them had shifted in some indefinable way, and something else was emerging to take its place. Carl sat in the empty offices, listening to the transcript over and over, staring into space until the floor he was on started to shut itself down for the night. Overhead lighting blinked out panel by panel, and the darkness beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows washed quietly in to fill the workspaces like dark water. Unused systems dropped into standby mode, screens locked to the Colin acronym, and small red lights gleamed to life in the gloom. No one came up to see what he was doing. Like most Colin facilities, the Oakland offices were manned around the clock, but by night the staffing went down to skeleton levels and an enabled smart system in the basement. Security was down there. Norton must just have told them to leave him alone. Gutierrez confessed. Hasty and disjointed, backing up, self-correcting, probably lying and embellishing along the way. A picture emerged, anyway.
"Someone in the familias. Had to break ranks sooner or later. The war's just fucking stupid. I don't know, Marsalis. They didn't feed me that much fucking information. Just had to fake the guy through. That's what I do, you know."
At some point in the protracted, half-hour gapped interrogation, something tipped over in Gutierrez. Fear. The dangled promise of Colin protection. Maybe some griping sense of betrayal for his time in custody, waiting for a familiar rescue that hadn't yet come. Resentment built from smouldering, sparked, and finally flared into open, angry revolt.
"Look, I'm a fucking cormorant, man. A wire hire. It's not like I've got blood with any of them. Why are they going to tell me a fucking thing they don't have to?" "Well, obviously someone who stands to gain from a cessation of hostilities with Mars. You don't need me to tell you that, right?" Yeah. Jump the docking protocols. Put the guy down off the California coast." "No, they didn't say why. Like I said." "Yeah, of course I showed him how to jumpstart the cryocap gel. How else was he going to survive a splashdown?"
And with the resentment, a steadily leaking pool of self-pity and justification.
"Yeah, fucking right, that was an accident. You think I planned to send him home awake like that? Think that's the kind of work I do from choice? Should have woken up 2 weeks from home, not from Mars. Fucking would have too if I'd had my way. I told them it was risky killing the engine 2 weeks into the trajectory. Told them it might knock off and trigger the other stuff, but hey, why the fuck listen to the expert? What does he fucking know? Because if you shut the engine down 2 weeks from home, Colin Earth sends a rescue ship up to find out what the fuck happened. Guaranteed. They don't want to take the risk of a docking fuck-up. Can't afford the bad publicity. But if it shuts down 2 weeks into the trajectory, and then the ship runs silent but smooth all the way home, then they're going to trust the auto systems and let it go. You know how those fuckers are about costs.
There were a couple of hours of it, even when you cut out the transmission delay. The Data Hawk's resistance had gone like a damn wall failing. Carl went back through it time after time because the alternative was to start thinking about Sevgi Ertekin. He listened until what Gutierrez was saying started to rub smooth in his head, until it was just patterned noise with no more meaning than the stamped geometric light and dark of windows lit and not in the other buildings outside the window. He saw her walk back in through the door of the bar once more. Wry grimace, and the slow ooze of blood on her shoulder and sleeve. The kick in his throat when he saw it. The relief when she said she was okay. The
Blood,
said the transcript for the nth time.
Not like I've got blood with any of them.
He frowned, hit pause, rewind. The transcript gibbered backward, rolled again. Gutierrez sulked once more.
Look, I'm a fucking cormorant man, a wire hire. It's not like I've got blood with any of them.
He heard his own voice and Bambaren's, worried at by the wind across Saxe-Waman.
My familiares share a common dislike of your kind, Marsalis. You cannot be unaware of this.
Yes, you also share a sentimental attachment to ties of blood, but that... He sat up suddenly straight from his slump. He played it back again, listened once more to the juxtaposition he'd never spotted before. That's got to be it. He reeled back some more, backed up through the Data Hawk's rambling.
Obviously someone who stands to gain from a cessation of hostilities with Mars. You don't need me to tell you that, right?
Fucking got to be. He stared at the revelation as it unfolded in the LCLS blast of the desk lamp. Bambaren's image-tight knowledge of Project Lawman's weaning procedures. Greta Jurgen's boasting. Bambaren's suave, understated confirmation when called on it. The two items collided in his head. You've made a niche career out of coexisting with the Initiative, and from what Greta said, it's a flourishing relationship.
I don't believe Greta Jurgens discussed my business associations with you.
No, but she tried to threaten me with them. The implication was that you have bigger friends these days and you keep them closer.
Someone who stands to gain. A sentimental attachment to ties of blood.
Fucking had to be. The realization of how close to the mystery he'd been digging at the time came in across waves of tiredness and made him giddy with exhilaration. All the time. All the fucking time we were that close. Just fucking wait till I tell Sevgi. And then, abruptly, it was all worth nothing again. And all he had was rage. He checked the files. Rang Matthew with it. Gaioso. The Data Hawk seemed to be tasting the name.
Okay, but it may take a while, especially if people have been hiding things the way you say they have.
I'm not in a hurry. Slight pause at the other end of the line.
That's not like you, Carl.
No. He stared at his reflected self in the nighttime glass of the office windows. Grimaced. I don't suppose it is. More silence. Matthew didn't like change, at least not among his human colleagues. Carl could feel his discomfort crawling on the line. Sorry, Matt, I'm kind of tired.
Matthew.
Yeah, Matthew. Sorry again. Like I said, tired. I'm waiting for some things to shake out at this end, so I'm in no rush for this stuff. That's all I meant.
Okay.
Matthew's voice went back to sunny as if he'd thrown a switch.
Listen, you want to know a secret?
A secret?
Yes, confidential data. Would you like to know it?
Carl frowned. He didn't often use video when he talked to Matthew. The Data Hawk didn't seem to like it much, for one thing, and for another the calls were usually purely functional, so it seemed pointless. But now, for the first time, he wished he could see Matthew's face. Confidential data's usually the reason I ring you, he said carefully. So yeah, let's hear it.
Well, you're in trouble with the Brussels office. Gianfranco de Palma is very angry with you."
"He told you that?"
"Yes. He told me not to communicate with you any more, not until you come back from the rim."
A slow, leaking anger trickled in Carl's belly. "Did he now?"
"Yes, he did."
"I notice you're not doing what he told you."
"Of course not," Matthew said serenely. "I don't work for Ungler. I'm part of the interagency liaison, and you are my friend."
Carl blinked. "That's good to know," he said finally.
"I thought you'd be pleased."
"Listen, Matthew." The anger was shifting, coloured with something altogether less certain. The flush of understanding he'd had earlier seemed to recede, drowning out by new factors. "If De Palma talks to you again—"
I know. Don't tell him I'm checking on Gaioso for you."
"Yes, that." Creeping sense of unease now. "But you tell him also that we're friends, okay? That you're my friend."
"He'll know that already, Carl. It's obvious just looking at the data that—"
"Yeah, well, he may not have looked too closely at the data, you know. You tell him you're my friend. You tell him I said that, and that I told you to tell him that too." Carl stared somberly at the night outside. "Just so he's clear." A little later he let himself out of the building, looking for a cab to get him back to the hotel. He walked down through the cool of the evening on big, successive rectangles of crystalline violet light from the street's LCLS overheads. It felt like crossing a series of small theatre stages, each one lit for performance he refused to stop and give. His head was fogged with lack of sleep. Weary, speculative whirl in there that just wouldn't quit, still jostling for position with an expansive, freewheeling anger. Fucking De Palma. He didn't realize how much rage must show on his face until he knocked into a street entertainer coming the other way and loaded down with what seemed like random pieces of junk. They cannoned, shoulder to shoulder, and his bulk sent her sprawling. The junk clattered and scattered right across the pavement. A single steel wheel from a child's bike rolled away glinting in the LCLS, hit the curb, and keeled over abruptly in the gutter beyond. The entertainer looked up at him from where she'd fallen, face, painted features, sullen. "Why don't you—" And her voice dried up. He stood looking down at the garish clown-masked face and rigid copper page boy wig for a silent moment, then realized that his mouth was tight, jaw still set with undischarged anger at De Palma, at Olmbekend, at a whole host of shadowy targets he still couldn't clearly make out. "Yeah. None of whom is this girl. Get a grip, Carl." He grunted and offered her his hand. "Sorry. Wasn't paying attention. My fault." He hauled her to her feet. The fear stayed in her eyes, and she snatched her hand away as soon as she was upright. He moved to help her gather up the scattered bits and pieces of her act from the pavement, saw how she flinched, was still afraid of this big, black man on the violet-panelled, deserted street. Gritty irritation flared through him. "I'll leave you to it," he told her curtly. He got the feeling she was watching him out of sight as he walked away. Something nagged at him about the encounter, but he couldn't be bothered to chase the thread. A cab cruised by on the cross street ahead, and he yelled and signalled. The sensors registered him, and the cab executed a natty, machine-perfect U-turn across the oncoming traffic, pulling sedately in to collect him. The door hinged out. He got in. Low light and slit windows, leatherette fittings. The rush of memory from his cab ride the night before, the one that Sevgi Ertekin had spotted him getting into and followed, came and did him some tiny, inexplicable harm inside. The generic female interface rezzed up. "Welcome to Merit Cabs. What will—" "Red Sands International," he said roughly. "The Red Sands chain operates on both sides of the bay. Which do you require?" "San Francisco." "In transit," the face said smoothly. The features composed. Once again he thought of Carmen Wren and her generic Rim State's beauty. The smooth... The clown. The fucking clown. "Stop the cab," he snapped. They glided to a halt.
He wrestled with the door. "You want to fucking let me out?" "The engagement fee is outstanding," said the cab diffidently. "Regardless of trajectory, Merit Cabs reserves—" "I'm coming back. I'm fucking coming back. Just hold it here." The door clunked free and hinged. He spilled out, sprinted back up the cross street for the corner. Before he reached it, he already knew what he'd find. He cornered at speed anyway, ran on, back up the long line of crystalline violet stage panels, back toward the Collin block. The street was empty, just the way he'd known it would be. Bits and pieces of junk lay unrecovered, exactly where they'd fallen. The bicycle wheel sat gaunt and canted in the gutter. The face-painted woman was gone. He pivoted about, scanned the street in both directions. Pale, crystalline stages, lit for performance, marching away in both directions. He stood in the pale violet fall of the LCLS utterly alone, tilting sense of the unreal. For one fragmented moment, he expected to see Elena Aguirre come drifting toward him over the narrow bands of gloom that interspersed the panels of light. Come to collect him after all. Chapter 46. They went over it in the garden. Sevgi Ertekin's choice. She would not be left out of the briefings. "Still my fucking case," she said tightly when Norton protested. Carl guessed it had to be better for her than contemplating what was coming, and she seemed to have either finished or gotten fed up with Al-Nafzawi. So they sat in the wooden chairs in the soft sunlight, listened to the brook behind them, and they all acted like Sevgi wasn't going to die. "Fucking face-painted!" she exploded when Carl told them about his encounter the night before. "That bitch did the exact same thing to me back on Bulgakov's cat. She slammed into me coming around a support pillar. Had to be her. Why the fuck would she do that?" "Listening in," said Carl. "I went over to Alcatraz last night immediately after. Set off every alarm in the place when I tried to get down to the shielded suites. They took a pinhead mic off my jacket, size of a breadcrumb, Camila chrome casing, sticks on impact, practically everlasting battery." "Then there'll be one on my clothing too." "Most likely, yeah." "So this is Wren, still in the game?" Norton frowned. "That doesn't make much sense. You'd think she'd be running down to Freeport to get a new ID and a face change." Carl shook his head. "She's smarter than that. Why go for major surgery when you can just slap on a layer of paint and a wig?" "Yeah," said Sevgi sourly. "You know how many street entertainers there's got to be in this city? You see them fucking everywhere." "That doesn't answer the question of what she's doing hanging around," Norton pointed out. "If her original assignment was to back Merrin up, then I'd say she's out of a job." "I told you this wasn't finished," said Carl. "We took down Merrin a little early, but apart from that, whoever set this thing up is running exactly according to plan." Norton gave him a dubious look. "Yeah, but according to what plan?" Sevgi said. "You say Gutierrez claims he was sending Merrin back as a Martian Familia hitman, revenge killings for the enforcement violence back in the 70s. Manco Bambaren gets in on the act because he could use a change of leadership, gets the chance to make the most of his relationships with the initiative corporations. And then instead of taking down the Lima bosses, Merrin goes and hits a couple of dozen random citizens in Jesusland and the Rim. It doesn't join up at all." Gutierrez thought he was sending back a Familia hitman. Carl geared up for the revelation. "But there's obviously another agenda here. For one thing, Bambaren's tied into this with a lot more than business interests." Another cranked eyebrow from Norton. "Meaning?" "Meaning that Merrin's genetic donor mother, Isabella Gayoso, is also Manco Bambaren's real mother. Bambaren and Merrin were brothers. Well, half-brothers." Sevgi sat upright in her chair, staring. "No fucking way!" "I'm afraid so. Isabella Rivera Gayoso, slum mother in Arequipa, gave genetic material to a visiting U.S. Army medical unit who were on the scrounge down there with Elenis Hall Genentech. I think they paid her $50. She gave her second family name, her mother's surname, probably because she was ashamed. She also seems to have given a false sin, because the one on record with Elenis Hall is a dead end."
Or maybe they scrambled it somehow. I think back then they weren't all that fussed about keeping tight records. The whole project was off the books anyway. On paper, Project Lawman didn't exist. I don't believe this, Norton said evenly. The engine searches would have turned it up. Well, yeah, they might have, if there hadn't been so much deliberate data fogging going on at the time. Like I told you when I came on board, Sevgi, we were all ghosts back then. Nothing concrete, nothing some overzealous journalist might be able to nail down. And they used early engine technology to do the fogging, so it's solid. When Jacobson came along, some of the fog got lifted, but most of the Project Lawman records still belong to the Confederated Republic, and they weren't overly cooperative back when UNGLA was setting up. Our covert research guys are always turning up some fresh, dirty little secret the US military buried somewhere and forgot about. If that's true, then how did you find all this out? I asked one of our covert research guys. He did some digging for me last night, daytime back in Europe. Came back to me this morning just before he went to bed. He says it looks like there was some covering at the other end of things as well. Cheap data hawk stuff, probably Bumbaran trying to bury the unpleasant family history once he got some influence. Having a mother who cooperated with the gringo military, opened her legs for them right up to the ovaries, so to speak. Well, it isn't exactly a good thing to have on your resume if you're planning to make it big in the familias down there. Norton sniffed. I still fail to see how this research guy of yours could do something our engines couldn't. Well, there are a couple of reasons. The first is that I was going in from the far end. Something Bumbaran said to me, something about blood, just a feeling I had. I started with the assumption and asked my researcher to chase Gayoso down. I already had my connection. Your engines would have been working the other way, probably off a broad sweep trawl through the general data flow with Merrin as their starting point, then a filter for relevance and more detailed follow-up. Engines aren't human. They don't do cognitive leaps the way we do. Like I said last week, Yaroshenko intuition's a wonderful thing, but you have to have something to triangulate off. Your engine data trawl's only as good as your chosen filters, and I'm guessing they were Mars or Rim states related. Yeah, and Lawman related. Sure, and Lawman related. But think about what that means. Do you really think an engine search running into the Project Lawman protocols is going to pay any attention to genetic source material? You're talking about people who never met their offspring, never had anything to do with them. In Gayoso's case, you're talking about someone who was never even in the same country, never came within 1,000 kilometers of the thing they made with their donated ovum. Genetic material is cheap as fuck, even now with Jacobson in force. Back then, it meant less than nothing. No machine is going to see that as a lead worth pursuing. It never would have made it through the filters for follow-up analysis. You have to already know that the genes Isabella Gayoso handed on to her son are important before you can get the engine to make the link. And like I said, she was never anywhere near him. Norton frowned. Hold it. There was a deployment in Bolivia, wasn't there? Back in 88, 89? 88, said Sevgi. Argentina and Bolivia. But it's disputed. A lot of the data says he might not have been there at all. It also got him down as leading a platoon in Kuwait City around the same time. Yeah, but if he was there, Norton argued, suddenly enthused, that'd be a point of contact. That's maybe when Bumbaran finds out he's got a brother he didn't know about and... And what, Tom? Sevgi shook her head irritably. They meet, they have a few beers, and Merrin heads out for urban pacification duties in the Rim. 6 years later he goes to Mars, and 12 years after that, some Mars en Familia head cooks up some crackpot revenge assassination plan, chooses Merrin for the job, and Merrin turns around and says, "Oh hey, I've got a half-brother back on Earth who can help out with that." Come on, that's not it. There has to be something else, something that ties it in tighter than that. There probably is, Carl told them. I said there were a couple of reasons why your engines failed and my researcher didn't. Well, the second reason is that there's been a whole lot more data fogging, and it dates from a lot more recently than all this ancient history. Someone out there is still very much concerned to keep this whole thing under wraps. Someone who's using Carmen Wren, mused Sevgi. Keeping her deployed. That's an angle, Carl admitted. Did they destroy your pinhead bug? No, still holding it. We could try to put it back in play, I guess. See if we can draw Wren in. But I don't see it working. She's too sharp for that. This much silence, she'll know she's been blown. So where does that leave us? Norton asked. It leaves us with Bumvaren, Carl said grimly. We go down there and we stamp on him until he tells us what we want to know. And unbekend? Sevgi asked, with a strange light in her eye. Silence. Norton hurried in to fill it. Checked that yesterday. I talked to Coyle. No record that fits with the descriptions you both gave. But onbekend's a name from the Netherlands. Apparently it was Dutch bureaucracy's get-out for anyone who didn't have a fixed family name to go on their identity documents. He grimaced. It means unknown. Sevgi coughed out a laugh. Oh, very good. Yeah, seems quite a few Indonesians ended up with it in the last century, because they didn't have family names in the sense the Dutch understand the concept. It's pretty common all over the Pacific Rim, these... He stopped, because Sevgi's cough hadn't died away. It picked up, intensified until it shook her, feedback from the stimulus in the format triggering the real thing back in her hospital bed. The force of it bent her almost double in the chair, and then she flickered in and out of existence as her mental focus slipped. Carl and Norton exchanged a silent glance.
This is the end of the CD. The program continues on the next CD.